Okay, so how can travel fatigue and jet lag be managed? I think this is a enormous area with some complicated strategies. So I'm not really going to go into too much depth about, someone flying from Europe to the US. There are significant issues with that, or vice versa. And so I think that that really is not is beyond the scope of this portion. I'll give some suggestions and strategies that I think are helpful, but these long haul flights, there are definitely some calculations that need to be done to really optimize. What I typically tell people is you want to kind of plan ahead with your training as well as increasing sleep. So one of the things that we already talked about was sleep banking. So let's just say, for example, that situation where you live in Phoenix and you're going to Orlando for a big tournament of some kind, right? You want to plan ahead. You want to start to decrease that training load so that you're not fatiguing, not putting yourself at risk for increased injury or increased illness during a flight. That is really important because you're exposed to a lot of individuals while you're in the airport. So decreasing that training can be helpful. And then banking your sleep. So adding an hour to 2 hours of sleep per day, getting some naps in throughout that week to just bank some sleep prior to your travel. Now, this is where it starts to get a little bit tricky, and anybody who's very knowledgeable in this area will certainly point out that it's not a one-size-fits-all. I'm just trying to keep it very simple. This is geared towards families and athletes who are younger, so putting a little bit too much detail here, I think, will be counterproductive. But generally, it's thought that you need about 1 day per time zone crossed in order for your body to naturally align with the destination you're going for. So the thought is, if you are traveling 3 time zones away, you're going to need about 3 days to adjust your body to the natural alignment at that destination. Now, I realize that's not something that is always feasible, but that's kind of what the literature and research says. Now, you can see that this is super important in times like March Madness, where you've got multiple games in a weekend or multiple games in a week, and you're traveling to different venues, or your site might be all the way on the other side of the country. So I think that is something to consider as well. If you do some pre-planning, you can adjust your sleep patterns to kind of match that destination. So one of the strategies that I'll use is if I have an athlete that's going from Phoenix to Orlando, right? So that's in the eastward direction, right? So where you are is, if you are going in the eastward direction, your body clock is behind that eastern time zone. So you've got to advance it forward a little bit, but be careful of the wording here. So if I am in Phoenix and I'm going to Orlando, I've got to get my body advanced to catch up to where that time zone is. So what I want to do is wake up a little bit early and try to phase shift that a little bit earlier so that I'm getting up about 1 to 2 hours earlier than I normally would be, which would coincide with the correct time that I'd be getting up in Orlando. And it's the opposite in the flying in the opposite direction. So if you live in New York and you're flying to LA, right, you are ahead. Your body clock is ahead of the time that's in LA, and what you need to do is shift it backwards or phase delay your sleep. So what you might do if you're going in the western direction is you might stay up a little later and sleep in a little bit more to correlate to the times that you would expect to have when you are in that West Coast city compared to the East Coast. I know, very confusing, but just keep keep it simple. If you're going in the eastern direction, you want to try to wake up a little bit early, because that would coincide with when you're going to be getting up in the East Coast. And then if you're going in the western direction, you want to try to go to sleep a little bit later, because that would be correlating to when you would go to sleep in that West Coast city. That can be difficult, but trying to do that by 30 minutes or an hour throughout the week prior to travel can be helpful. I do recommend, once you start traveling, so let's say you're driving, even if you're driving 1 or 2 time zones away, or you are flying, just change your clock at that time to the time that it is going to be at your destination. It just makes it a lot easier when you're trying to match your sleep. So you're trying to think of, okay, I should be getting about sleep right about now, or I should be eating breakfast right about now. You want to make that change, because a lot of times there's layovers, you kind of don't know what time it is, and you want to be strategic about that as well. And then when you get to that local destination, you want to try to get on that pattern as soon as possible. Yes, you'll be a little bit tired, but if you can get on that sleep pattern consistent with the local city, that can be very helpful. There is very good data that natural sunlight can be helpful to give that cortisol response and allow you to kind of be more coordinated with the morning time. So if you have your watch set or your clock set to the local time that you'll be flying to, trying to coordinate some natural sunlight at that time that would be consistent with the morning would be great. As well as trying to avoid light in your eyes during the evening times that it would be at that destination. So I know that can get a little bit tricky, but those are kind of some of the simple things that I think we can do to be strategic about it, and adjusting your sleep prior to your travel can be one of the most strategic plans you can do. Then what are some of the general travel tips that I give? So I do a lot of focus on where you're going to be staying, hotels, that type of thing. So I mentioned this in some of the earlier lectures, but considering a hotel or accommodation that's not with 20, 30, 40 other teams, that might not be always feasible. But maybe if you stay 30, 40 minutes outside of where you're going to be playing, that might be better in terms of the noise level in your accommodations. Or, you know, if your team goes together and does more of an Airbnb type of situation. But keep in mind, not everybody sleeps the same way, right? So not everybody's listening to this lesson and being strategic. You know, people are trying to stay up late, they're playing video games. So all of those things can be considered when you're traveling. I usually will recommend, if you can, get high level floor so that nobody is above you, because there could be a team that doesn't have an early game and they're up being loud. So that's something to consider. You want to think about where your room is located. So do you want to be by the elevators? Or do you want to be at the end of the hall where you're not going to have as much traffic? Same thing, especially with these sporting events. Everybody's using the ice makers in the hotel, and you want to be thoughtful about whether or not it makes sense to be near the ice maker or not. So that's something to consider as well. In addition, I do try to take a chip clip with me, or some type of hanger that has the little clips on it. And what I'll do is bring those blackout curtains together, and I'll clip them so that there's no light that can get in. Because a lot of times if you just kind of overlap them together, it doesn't quite block all the light. So that's something to consider as well. I think that keeping a little night light with you, so like a red light or something like that, like we talked about earlier, a little red light, because, you know, sometimes a parent is trying to get food ready, get snacks ready, get uniforms ready, and you're trying to sleep. So not necessarily having a bright light on while that's occurring, you know, might be quite useful. And then considering like a sound machine as well, that may be a strategy to use, so that you can certainly block out some of the sound as needed. So that's what I've got for you on the sleep module. And then if you're following this in order or you're doing this as a part of the bigger program, we're going to move on to the sports nutrition module next.